welcome back to our Lunch and Learn series. So this is the final one in our sessions about the upcoming changes to IPP3A. An update, the legislation has not moved any yet in Cabinet again, so I'm not sure of the latest date. So in terms of today, we're going to talk about why we might need to make contractual changes. If you have any questions as you go along, feel free to pop them in the Q&A and we will try and answer them as we go or come back to them at the end. But feel free to pop them in there and you can do that anonymously if you wish. So it may not initially seem obvious why we're talking about contracts and IPP3A at all. And the reason we're doing that is because some of your vendors will be collecting on your behalf. So they'll be doing collection for you. And therefore, there may be obligations around providing notice that you might want to pass on. And equally, some of your vendors will be providing information to you or some of your third parties. They may not be a vendor. So all of those arrangements would likely have a contract of sorts. Now, when I talk about contracts for government, noting you can't contract crown to crown, contract can be replaced with the word MOU, IMA, gentleman's agreement, etc. So it is generally the paper between the parties that you've agreed what you're going to do and how. So before we can start and work out what the changes for IPP3A mean, we need to work out what kind of relationship we have with this other party. Now, first and foremost, I would say the relationship you have is never simple. We're going to talk about some easy use cases today, but sometimes your relationship with a party can vary by service that you get from them or by what part of the deliverable they're doing in terms of how they operate. So it might sound simple today, but yeah, sometimes slightly more complicated. So today I'm going to use GDPR language. The same concepts exist in the New Zealand Privacy Act, just the wording slightly different and slightly more confusing for it, and we'll go through it. So first up, the controller relationship. So in the Privacy Act, this is what is called an agency, not to be confused with an agency being a government agency. Agency in the New Zealand Privacy Act means an organisation that has obligations under the Privacy Act. So this is the organisation that manages and collects personal information for their own purposes. So this is the retailer who is running a loyalty scheme. This is the bank that is giving mortgages, the insurance company, the government agency who's issuing visas, that sort of agency. Now, generally, every business in New Zealand or organisation is a controller in some form. Even if you are a vendor, for example, so maybe you're Microsoft, you will be a controller for some of your information. If you're a vendor, quite often that is your HR information, your payroll. It could also be your sales opportunities and your purchasing of who you're selling goods and services to. So all of that side of your business, you would be what's called the controller for it. Now, someone asked last week about what are the subtle differences in the Privacy Act 3A and GDPR. One of the key things that was discussed when a number of people fed back on it was about who has obligations for IPP3A under the Privacy Act. Who should it sit with? Should it sit with the party who is providing the information indirectly to your organisation? Or should it sit with the receiving organisation? So for New Zealand, the decision was made that it would sit with the receiving organisation. So if you are that organisation as a controller who is receiving personal information from someone else indirectly, then the obligations for 3A sit with you. Now, you may want to contractually shift them to someone else, and that's what we're going to talk about. But the buck stops with you. Okay. And that bug also includes any indirect collection that is done on your behalf. So common use case we get is I ask maybe a company to do a survey about how people feel about things, for example. And they might be collecting information on my behalf. I'm not doing it myself. They are doing it for me. Okay. There may be elements of that that are indirect. There may not be. So just consider whether that is a case for it. The next kind of relationship we have is as a processor. So this is somebody, and as they helpfully known as agent, not to be confused with agency, which is why I said we'll stick with the GDPR language. An agent is someone who does something on your behalf. The Privacy Act is very clear. If they use the information for their own purposes, they are no longer an agent of yours, okay? So if, for example, you are sharing personal information with them so they can train their AI model to improve it for the greater good of their customer population, not just for yourself, but for everybody, then they would no longer be an agent. Okay, and that's one that's cropping up more and more, that we're seeing that line blur about how they can use your information for their own purposes, and it's kicking them out of being that processor. Now, Privacy Act says if they are a processor or an agent, then it is not considered a disclosure when they share information with you and when you share it with them. Okay. So in effect, they are still you. So no outward shares. What that does mean, therefore, is if they are sharing personal information with you and you are collecting it and using it, etc., that is not a collection because it wasn't a disclosure from them in the first place. Okay. Now, most of those arrangements are set up. Quite a number of you will have what's called data processing agreements with these agents, processors, that sets out how the privacy needs to work, particularly if they are a vendor who's subject to GDPR or you are subject to GDPR. That will definitely be there. And that very clearly states things like they cannot use it for their own purposes. However, do watch, as I said, in the contracts, a number of these around things like training AI says the data processing agreement does not apply for this purpose. That is your red rag that says, okay, they're not a processor, therefore that personal information, we're going to kick them over to a controller. And that's why I said the relationship is never often one or the other. Okay. So what does that now mean in practice for us? So the variances of who they are and what our relationship is will vary on what it means for IPP3A. So we'll start with the slightly more complicated ones. If they are a controller with you. So this is a party who is giving you information. So you are party B and you are receiving information from party A. So party A is that conference company who have signed everyone up to go to the data protection meeting thing yesterday in Auckland, and they have got all your good contact details, and now they are going to share it with party B, which is all of our people who had a sponsorship there or a stand, and they are going to disclose that information to party B. What this means is party B is therefore collecting the information. Okay, so the collection point for it will be here. So this is where you are indirectly collecting. At this point, it's coming over, and this is where party A is disclosing to you. Okay, so the obligations under IPP3A sit here with party B. You are receiving the personal information from someone else indirectly. It's not about them. Now, what do we need to do? So first and foremost, can we rely on the exemption? We talked about a couple last week about they've already told them that this disclosure is going to happen. So if we jump back, we're talking about this party here has told the individuals whose personal information it is about that this is going to happen. So the exemption says that the disclosing party must provide the privacy notice for the collecting party. So they're going to need to say, when you signed up for that conference and agreed to their privacy statement, by the way, we are sharing your information with our trade partners, sponsors, and here is a link to all of their privacy statements. Cool. Okay. Could be quite a long list, but okay, maybe that will work for us. And also to be part of that exemption, then we need to have a sound basis to believe they did it, not just they told us they had and we think it's okay. And we also need to have reasonable grounds for believing that an individual who went to that conference was made aware. So this is where we talked last time about it most probably not being enough to just be like, oh, I stuck it in the privacy notice. And yeah, there was a list of all these people we were going to share with and link their privacy statement. But no, our stats of our websites show that only one person has read the privacy notice. We therefore can't have reasonable grounds to believe that individual has had that notice. So what we need to do for that is then have that tick box or something that says, yep, I understand my information's going to be given to these trade holders and I don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand it's going to happen and I have been made aware of their privacy statements. And that's on a per person basis. Okay, so that's what we're going to need to allow for that exception to take place for it. And we'll come on to what does that mean contractually in a minute. So let's jump back and talk about our processes first and foremost, because they're the easiest ones for us to deal with. So if someone is a processor, so they are absolutely clearly a processor, they cannot use the information for any other purpose. First and foremost, it is a really good opportunity to check that that is abundantly clear in the contract. So as I say, the requirements for IPP3A don't apply if they're a processor. You're not indirectly collecting from this party, okay? However, we are still seeing a hangover from many years ago that a lot of these contracts aren't clear on whether they're a processor or not. And as time and technology has kicked over, it's now really important we are clear. You know, when we had to send paper to each other, it was really clear who had it and who was using it. Now it's electronic data, both parties could be using it, one of them, etc. So we need to be really clear on what it is. If they are meant to not be using it for their own purpose, spell it out. Okay. Now that will cover off making sure they are a processor. We also then might want to think about what clauses do we have in there to protect us around indirect collection. So we're responsible for the actions that this processor takes. Okay, they are you at the end of the day, they're part of the royal you. So we need to think about what do we want to say around indirect collection to them. And this goes across your wider business as well, right? So we might say, actually, we've made a policy decision. We don't want any indirect collection. And we certainly don't want our vendors indirectly collecting on our behalf unless they go through a specific sign-off process. So this is something we might want to also build into our privacy policy. So that being the internal document about how we manage privacy at our organization, we might want to add some sections to it now for these upcoming changes about who's allowed to do indirect collection, in what circumstances, etc. So we might want to put a prohibition on our vendors from indirectly collecting on our behalf without some sign off or just hard as no. Okay. Now, if we say to this vendor, you may indirectly collect because actually we need them to do it for a business purpose for us. So let's say they are the vendor who is providing identity confirmation for you. So they are that vendor where they take a picture of your driver's license and a picture of your customer and confirm their identity. There's a bunch of them around in that space. They are indirectly collecting usually from DIA for the confirmation service we spoke about. Okay, so they're getting that confirmation indirectly from DIA. Yes, correct name, correct date of birth, they're not dead, etc. So in that contract, we might say to them, you may indirectly collect only from the confirmation service and only under these rules. We might then also want to think about, do we want to make this vendor responsible for providing notice in relation to that indirect collection? So if it is a use case for a vendor where they are indirectly collecting on our behalf because we want them to, do we want to extend our services with them and say, you need to provide the notice? Or do we need to say, we don't want you to provide the notice, but let's be really clear with them who's responsible for doing that notice, because we don't want 2 notices and we don't want no notices. Neither's going to work for you. If we do want them to give notice for us, we're going to need to give them a privacy statement to be able to do that notice for us. Even if we don't want them to give notice for us and they are collecting directly for us, so not indirectly, but directly, and we've had to update our privacy statement as part of doing our changes for IPP3A, we might still need to give them a new privacy statement to give to our direct customers. Okay. So some places we might want to put some of these contractual changes in. Some people have them in their MSA. They might want to put them in there. Some people, where you have a data processing agreement, want to pop them in there. That is the more sensible place if you have a data processing agreement, that they just go in a section somewhere there for them. Now, as I say, not all of your vendors will be collecting for you at all, any sort of personal information. Certainly not all of them will be indirectly collecting for you, but you are going to have to go through them and work out for every vendor, is this a thing? Do I need to worry about it? Do I need to put these clauses in? Yes, no, maybe. And then going forward, when we do the renewals, let's be clear and put them in for avoidance of doubt. We don't want you to do this. Okay, so that's our easy ones, our processes. That will be the majority of your contracts, hopefully. However, if we go back to our case where we are collecting indirectly from someone else who's being the controller, so that's our conference example, we might want to put additional clauses. If we are the sponsor, for example, we might want to put additional clauses in our contract with the conference provider, or they might want to put them in on our behalf, but we're certainly going to want them. So we're going to want clauses in there that we most probably already have to only disclose in accordance with the Privacy Act. So by that, I'm saying they're only allowed to give information to us in the first case if one of the exemptions in IPP11 applies, or it actually fits within IPP11 itself. So person said it's okay, I was made aware and it was the purpose of collection, they're dying, unlikely to be the use case here, but one of those exemptions needs to apply before they can give you anything. What you are likely to find as you review some of these relationships is that maybe some of that disclosure was not legitimate originally. And that's going to bring you into problems in New Zealand in terms of the collection, because you can only collect information under IPP4 lawfully. So if they should never have disclosed it to you, in effect, it's stolen goods, right? And now you are the receiver of stolen goods. And if you go on and use them and sell them on, it's going to all end badly for everyone. So you need to be sure they have the right to give it to you in the first place. You then check IPP2, do I have the right to receive it? If no, stop doing this. If we are clear, we have the right to disclose and we have the right to receive, then we need to think about what are we going to want in terms of changes. So if we want to rely on that exemption that says we don't need to give notice as the receiver because we're going to want them to tell the people, and we can then rely on that exemption that says we believe they've been correctly told, then we're going to want to put a link to our privacy statement or get them to include a link to our privacy statement as part of theirs. Okay. So we most probably want to write a clause in that says you must include a link to our privacy statement where you are disclosing this information at that time. Now, quick show of hands. How many of you here use Google Analytics? Got any takers for Google Analytics? Yeah, at least one. I'm picking it's good number of you, right? Who has ever read the terms of Google Analytics, the long? One of the things in Google Analytics, it says, because it's come from Europe, is that when you use Google Analytics, you must, as the disclosing party, include a link to Google's privacy statement in your privacy statement. So that's in the clauses they've written in. So this is exactly what we're talking about here. If I'm the receiving party, you must tell them as the disclosing party and give them a link to my privacy statement. Okay. Now, the risk of this is, like the Google one, if I go to some of your websites and read your privacy statement, positive it will be missing. Okay. So you're going to have to think about how do I manage that on an ongoing basis. Writing it into the contract is one thing. Great. You've got contractual cover. But how do you actually make sure it applies in practice? So you might actually want to check it before you sign off as part of your PIA for this project. Is it actually present and correct? Okay. You then need to, under the guidance from the Privacy Commissioner, be able to evidence that the individual was given that notification. They didn't need to agree to it, but that individual, not the population, named individual, was given it. So you might want to write into your contract something like, you will have a tick box. You will maintain evidence and we can request it at any time. So that you have that comfort that you can, if the Privacy Commissioner comes to you and goes, show me the evidence that Fred agreed to this, or not agreed, didn't consent, but Fred was made aware of this, you can go back to them and go, give it to me. Okay. Or maybe you want it so that when they provide the data to you, they attach it and send it with it. So you've got it on your files ready. Depends what kind of relationship you want with them. You might want to, because at the end of the day, this obligation sits with you as the receiving party for this data to make sure that notification has been correct. You might want to put in your contract the right to input and sign off on that design of it, of how that consent's going to be happening. Or you might want to dictate what the words need to be. So those of you who use things like the credit bureaus, etc., they actually specify what words you have to use in your privacy statement, for example, in their subscription agreements. Okay, so that's part of them meeting their obligations. So something similar might be needed for this. At the moment, a number of you will have in your contracts with these parties a right to audit. Not always. You usually will have it in for processor, definitely. But you won't necessarily have it in there for someone who's giving you information, because at the end of the day, they're responsible for their obligations under the Privacy Act till the point they throw it over the fence and you receive it. So you don't have much of a bearing on theirs. So at the moment, you might not have the right to audit. Therefore, you might want to say, actually, I want the right to audit, not to audit your whole business and what you're up to and breach and anything like that. That's their problem. But I might want the right to audit how you are giving notice to these people and making sure it's happened. So very, very cut down piece that you want to have rights over to have a check what they're up to on it. Now, the other choice, of course, is that you could say to these people, actually, you know, we don't want you to provide our privacy statement. We don't want you to give notice on our behalf. And we make it really clear in our contract that we don't want this to happen. And that you need to provide, you want to provide the notice. But it needs to be clear, as I said. You don't want 2 notices, you don't want no notices. So that's you guys as a controller going through your contracts where you've got this indirect collection happening and going, okay, I need to change this one, I need to change this one, etc. There will be a fairly large number to be changed. However, there is possibly for some of you, depending on your business, an even greater number of ones that you're going to need to change where you are the disclosing party. Okay, so this is where you are the conference organizer and you are going to disclose the information to all those parties who sponsored. You're going to want to put those clauses in place in that contract that they want in terms of receiving the information, or be very clear that you're not going to do it. So that's what I was saying earlier. If you're not going to give the notice, let's be abundantly clear, you're not going to do it, and this is their problem to sort out. So as an organization, you're going to have sort of 3 buckets of contract work to be done. You're going to have your processes where you want to write in, no, don't indirectly collect, be clear you're a processor, etc. You're going to have your parties you have a contract with where you are collecting from them. So that's your indirect collection parties, where you're going to want to write these clauses in to meet your obligations. So that's the ones you're going to want to start and request changes to those contracts, should we say. You're going to drive that because the obligation's on you. And then from the other side, if you are one of those parties who is disclosing information as well, you're going to have your reciprocal party on those contracts coming to you going, hey up, we want to change our contract. Now, for some of you, those contracts, those receiving ones, will depend on whose paper it's on, right? So if all of your disclosures are on a set contract, you disclose to loads of organizations. I know you're the marketing association, right? I give it to loads of people. You're not going to want to agree individual contract clauses, changes with every single one of those parties. You're likely to want to say, actually, we're going to change our standard contract across the board to everyone we disclose to. Here you go. Here is our new terms. Rather than waiting for every one of those organizations to come to you and go, hey, can we make some tweaks? Here's our words. We'd like to use ours. You're going to end up with an admin nightmare. Okay. So you're going to keep your lawyers quite busy for a while, I suspect, agreeing new contract clauses with everyone. And most probably an effect of IPP3A that a lot of people haven't considered yet as they work through this work is those bang-ons into how it works for those relationships. So where to next? The age-old problem of what contracts do we have? Some organizations better, we have a good contract register and we know what they are, etc. If you don't, you're going to have to find them all and then work out what relation type for each of them in relation to personal information. Okay, we'll split them in those 3 buckets. We said processor, receiving from, sending to. And then we need to make sure in our processor contracts, we've got clauses one about indirect collection. It's a really good time as well while you are doing those checks to make sure you also have all the clauses you needed for the changes to the Privacy Act in 2020. So the key one we're looking for at that point is breach. So good time while you're looking at the contracts anyway to have a bit of a checklist to go, for our processes, do we have breach? Do we have the right to audit? Are you going to tell us in time of a breach? Do you have security controls, etc.? So good time to have a check down those regardless. For our controller to controller, we then need to think about what we're going to put in terms of the collection and what we're going to put in about our disclosing. Now, for our disclosing ones, we might sit back and wait and think, yeah, we don't disclose that much. We will wait for someone else to come to us before we handle that problem. That is okay. And the reason I say that is the obligation for IPP3A, remember, sits with the receiving party, not the disclosing party, the receiving one. So you need to get your contracts where you're receiving it in line first before worrying about your disclosing ones. Okay. And you will have to do both sorts. There is not a single agency I can think of who doesn't disclose to somebody under something. Okay. So you are going to want to sort it out one way or another. And this includes across government, by the way. So I mentioned earlier contract meaning any sort of agreement. So if we take organizations like Department of Internal Affairs, for example, they collect a lot of information about when when someone wants to be a citizen, they check out you're a good person, you can write visa, etc., and they ask about your family, etc. Those agreements for getting that information from other government departments will need to be updated. And equally, once you get your citizenship, they then go forth and tell lots of other people that you've got your citizenship so they can update the records. So people like MB, so they don't keep chasing you for your work visa, etc. Those parties that are receiving it, they will want to make those changes too. So those are not contractual, the MOU changes, IMA changes, etc. that will all need to be worked through. And due to the mechanics of government, that again is not a small number of agreements to be worked through for some agencies on it. Perfect. That is all I have today about contracts. I would like to really thank everyone for coming along and ask if anyone's got questions.